I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was just after 10, the kind of late night when the cafe empties except for the cleaning crew and the regulars too stubborn to go home. I slipped into the corner by the window, the one with the cracked leather seat that sags under my weight just enough to make me feel at home. I usually order the same thing, black coffee, double shot, but she arrived before I had a chance to make the motion toward the counter. "Hey, Alex," she said, like it wasn't unusual for her to be here this late. Her hair was pinned back in a loose twist, a few strands falling against her neck. I caught myself noticing the curve of it before I could stop. "You remember," I said, almost laughing at how small it sounded. "I do," she said, and there was a pause, the kind that felt like she was deciding how much to give away. "You always get the double shot, right? With an extra splash." I nodded, and she went to the counter. I watched her hands, careful and quiet, folding a napkin around her change, flicking her eyes up only to meet mine for a fraction of a second. It wasn't flirtation exactly, too controlled for that, but it made my chest tighten anyway. I hadn't meant to notice these things. Usually, I kept myself in the background, unfinished text that I never sent, staring at the same stretch of ceiling while pretending to read, pausing my thoughts in the middle of sentences because I didn't know where they belonged. Tonight was the same, except she had a way of filling the pauses without trying. She returned, cup in hand, and slid into the seat across from me. The space smelled faintly of vanilla and the damp wool of her sweater. "Rough day?" I asked. "Same as yesterday," she said, shrugging, looking at the window instead of me. "Nothing new." I nodded, trying not to study the way her sleeve rode up her wrist when she reached for a coffee. I got your voicemail. Last night." Her lips twitched in a way that wasn't a smile. Not really, but it suggested she noticed something. "Oh, you listened." I shifted, letting my fingers trace the seam of my jeans. "Yeah, I wasn't sure what to say." She hummed, a sound like acknowledgement, but she didn't press. That was what made her dangerous, the quiet patience. We sat like that for a while. I looked outside and noticed how the streetlights pooled on the wet pavement, how a cat slipped past the door and disappeared into the night. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes distant, then glanced up at me, and I caught the faintest lift of her brow. Small moments, insignificant, but they made me conscious of every inch of her. I wanted to speak, but the words refused. So instead, I folded my napkin neatly, straightened it on the table, and caught myself flicking my gaze to her hands again, the way they cradled the cup. When she finally stood to leave, the moment lingered longer than it had any right to. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, unsure if I was hoping for routine or for something else entirely. I watched her walk away, and then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Can we talk?" "Tonight." I stared at it, heart picking up a quiet rhythm I couldn't name, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that pause in my life shift. Not into emptiness, but towards something I wasn't ready to define. The next evening, I found her on the back porch, sipping chamomile tea from the chipped mug I'd almost thrown out last summer. The sky was the color of old denim, dim and uncertain, and the smell of rain still clung to the garden. I lingered by the door, hesitant, watching her tilt her head slightly as she traced the rim of the mug with a finger. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," I said, stepping closer. "Thought I'd see if you were awake." She shrugged, a small concession, and gestured toward the empty chair across from her. I sat, careful not to disturb the soft piles of blankets she had arranged on the porch swing. "I used to sit out here a lot," she said, voice low, as if sharing a confession she didn't usually offer. "Before the divorce, I'd read until it got dark. The kids were asleep, and I thought I had the house to myself. But even then, I was never really alone." I nodded, unsure what to say, but the words hung in the space between us like the faint hum of a cicada. I noticed the way she tucked her legs beneath her, the subtle shift of her hand around the mug, and I felt an ache that wasn't entirely curiosity. "I sometimes imagine things that I probably shouldn't," I said, almost whispering, more to myself than to her. Like what life would be like if... I stopped because the thought itself was fragile, dangerous even. She was my friend's mom, divorced elegant in the way that made me suddenly aware of how much I still had to learn about people, about restraint. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed me the mug. "Tea's better shared," she said, and her fingers brushed mine just slightly. The contact was brief, polite on the surface, but I felt a tremor of something I didn't want to name. We drank in silence for a while. The porch creaked under the weight of our half-spoken words, the evening air cool against our skin. I wanted to reach for her hand again, to ask questions that weren't mine to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I traced the rim of my mug, following the same careful movement she had. "You know," she said softly, glancing at me now, "sometimes I forget people notice the little things. The way someone folds a napkin, the way they pause in a sentence. I think that's when it matters most." I laughed quietly, but it caught somewhere in my chest. I wanted to tell her she noticed those things about me, too, that I had been aware of her before I even knew her name. But I stayed silent, letting the weight of unspoken words settle. She pushed back from a swing and gave me a brief, teasing smile. "Careful," she said. "You might start reading too much into tea." Her hand brushed mine again as she returned to gather the mugs. Not intentional, not deliberate, but enough. Enough to make the air feel charged, like a word unspoken had already changed something. I watched her retreat inside, and the porch felt empty in a way that left me restless. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It was raining lightly the next afternoon, the kind of drizzle that blurs streetlights and makes asphalt smell like iron and wet leaves. I found her in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, sleeves rolled up. The mug I'd left yesterday was stacked neatly on the counter. "Hey," I said, hesitating in the doorway. My voice sounded smaller than I meant. "Hey," she replied, not looking at me. Just the curve of her neck as she leaned over the sink, the way her hair stuck slightly damp to her skin. I felt my chest tighten. I stepped closer, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because the quiet had been too loud all day, maybe because her presence had a weight I didn't want to resist. "Do you want help?" I asked. She glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "It's fine," she said, almost too quickly, a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't move. Instead, I reached for a dish towel, wiping the counter, tracing the same motion she had just done. My fingers brushed against hers, brief, accidental, and I felt a pulse where the contact lingered too long. She pulled back, just slightly, and I froze. There was a pause. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask if she ever thought about this, whatever it was between us. But the words wouldn't come. My hand stayed on the towel, folded and refold, and I imagined how her fingers would feel against mine again. The moment broke with a knock at the door. Her son's friend, my own friend, leaned in, umbrella dripping. "Sorry, didn't mean to." She straightened instantly, clearing the tension I hadn't realized had coiled around us. "No problem," she said, warm but contained, handing him a towel. I stepped back toward the doorway, letting the air reset itself, but the space between us felt like it had narrowed somehow, even with someone else there. Once he left, she leaned against the counter, eyes fixed somewhere beyond me. "You've got that look again," she said softly, and I realized it wasn't accusation, just recognition. I shifted on my heels, uncertain. "Look like what?" Her glance found mine for a fraction of a second. Too brief, too loaded. She moved to the fridge, opening it, closing it without taking anything. Small movements every day, but the tension lingered in them. I swallowed, imagining her in the rain, imagining 100 ways to say something that would undo us, or perhaps confirm it. I started then stopped. The word felt too heavy, too fast. She turned then, just a slow pivot, eyes locking with mine, standing close enough I could see the faint freckles across her cheekbone, the curve of her jaw. I stepped forward, a half step, unsure, heart too loud. For a moment, time slowed. I leaned in. She didn't move away, but she didn't lean in either. Our breaths mingled, and I could have, maybe should have, crossed the line. But then the moment ended. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, soft click, and the world snapped back. I exhaled silently. She smiled, distracted, and I stepped back. but the memory of almost lingered, unspoken, heavy in the air. I left the kitchen, hands shoved deep in pockets, thinking, I shouldn't feel this, shouldn't want this. And yet, the memory of that pause stayed with me, a quiet pulse that wouldn't let go. It was past 6 when I found her sitting on the park bench outside the grocery store, the streetlights just beginning to hum against the damp pavement. I slowed as I approached, noticing the way she hugged her coat tighter around her, shoulders stiff, hands tucked into the sleeves. "Hey," I said, careful. She looked up, eyes wide, a flicker of something raw passing through them. "Hey," she answered, voice low, almost swallowed by the evening air. We walked a few paces in silence, side by side, the space between us measured but charged. She glanced at me, then away, lips pressed together like she was chewing over some unsayable thought. I wanted to reach for her hand, but the weight of all the rules, age, my friend, the boundaries she'd drawn, made me hesitate. "I saw him today," she said abruptly, nodding toward the corner where her son had been leaving practice earlier. He laughed with his friends in a way that, I don't know, it just reminded me how much I've missed. I nodded, pretending casual, but my chest thumped. I didn't ask what she missed exactly, because I already feared the answer. Instead, I let my eyes flicker toward her hands, clenched slightly in her lap. "You don't have to," I started, voice trailing. "Say it." Her gaze caught mine, held it soft but piercing. "I don't usually do this," she said slowly. "Let someone see me like this. I didn't expect you to notice. But you do, don't you?" I swallowed, heat rising in my ears. "Ido." Simple words, too small for the moment. But they were all I could manage. Her shoulders slumped, a subtle surrender, and I felt the space between us shrink. "It's confusing," she admitted. "You're young, too young. And yet," she paused, biting her lip, looking away. "You make me feel visible, alive in ways I thought I'd lost." The confession hung in the air, fragile, dangerous. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words seemed to buckle under the weight of the quiet night. My hands itched to reach for hers, to trace the line of her wrist, but I froze. We walked a few steps more, neither of us speaking, listening instead to the faint drip of water from the leaves above. My mind raced, imagining the consequences, the looks of disapproval, the awkward mornings, but also the impossibility of stepping back. She glanced at me, and I saw it there, the same mix of fear and desire that mirrored my own. Her voice barely above a whisper, she asked, though the words weren't spoken, just implied by the tremor in her tone, "Do you feel the same?" I didn't answer immediately, because answering meant everything. Instead, I just kept walking beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her coat, the faint perfume of rain and vanilla clinging to her hair. The question lingered, unspoken, vibrating in the space between us, heavier than any confession. And for a moment, I imagined leaning in, closing the distance that reason demanded we keep. But the moment ended before it began. I exhaled, silent, heart too loud, and the night seemed to hold its breath with me. I noticed it first on Thursday. The porch swing was empty when I arrived, the mug I'd left the night before still stacked neatly in the corner, untouched. She didn't appear, and I waited longer than I meant to, half expecting her to emerge with that familiar tilt of her head, the way she always did when she noticed me before I even spoke. By Friday, she was brushing past me in the hallway, avoiding the small gestures we'd shared. No glance at my hands, no soft smile, no teasing remark about tea or rain. I tried to start a conversation. I thought maybe. She cut me off with a polite nod, eyes on her keys. "Busy," she said, quick, clipped. I left without another word, stomach twisting. Something had changed. Something she hadn't said, and now the quiet between us felt like it had teeth. I imagined every possible reason. Guilt, fear, maybe a new complication I hadn't known about. My imagination spun faster than I could stop it. Saturday morning, I noticed the same thing again. Her son's friend, a kid she barely tolerated, was helping her with groceries, laughing at something I hadn't heard. She didn't glance my way once. I wanted to call, to knock, to bridge whatever gap had opened, but my fingers hovered over my phone before retreating. I didn't feel anger exactly, just a suspended tension that made my chest ache. Later, I sat at the cafe where we had first noticed each other, staring at the chair she would have taken. I ordered my usual double shot, black, but didn't drink it. My eyes flicked to the door every few seconds, waiting for the familiar creak of her arrival. It didn't come. I didn't even think to ask why. Monday, I finally saw her. She was standing by the mailbox, sorting letters with a distracted air, her coat wrapped tight, scarf pulled high. I approached slow, careful. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said, quick, almost rehearsed. "Just busy." The pause that followed wasn't like the ones before. It was heavier, something unspoken pressing down on both of us. I wanted to ask about the missing evenings, about the shift in tone, about the things left unsaid. But I didn't. I wanted to reach for her hand, but the words and the gesture felt too dangerous now. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then tucked it away without comment. Her son came running, laughing, and she gathered him up, a flurry of motherly motions, and disappeared down the street. I stayed where I was, frozen, noticing how her absence left the world muted. I didn't send the text I had typed and erased 3 times. I didn't knock on the door that stood slightly ajar. I just watched the space where she had been, the air holding something I couldn't name. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found her in the kitchen again, late afternoon sun sliding across the counter in streaks of gold. She was washing a few dishes, sleeves rolled up, hair loose from the twist she usually wore. The silence between us felt heavy, but not uncomfortable, more like the weight of decisions waiting to be made. "Hey," I said softly, leaning against the doorway. She didn't look up immediately. "Hey," she replied, voice low, neutral, but the edges of it trembled slightly. I stepped closer, careful, unsure if I should reach for the gap between us or let it remain. I miss seeing you," I said, words small, tentative. Her hand paused on a plate. She swallowed, looking down at the suds in the sink. "I know," she murmured. I wasn't sure if this was right." The words hit me like a pulse, quiet but sharp. Right? Wrong. Age. Boundaries. The friend connection. Every rule we'd been skirting suddenly had a voice, and yet the pull didn't lessen. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, letting my hands hang at my sides. My fingers itched to brush hers, but I didn't. "Not yet." She finally lifted her gaze, eyes soft but steady. "I don't know either," she said. Pause. I wasn't planning to let it get like this. A laugh escaped me, short and unpolished. "Me neither." Another pause. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the counter. I wanted to tell her everything. The hours I'd replayed our conversations, the nights I'd imagined a single touch, the ache of distance, but it all seemed too much. Instead, she stepped closer, and I realized she had taken the same silent measure of me. Close, but not touching. Breath brushing air, a shared rhythm. "I don't want to ruin anything," she said quietly. "But I feel it too. You make the quiet less lonely." My chest tightened. All the unspoken confessions I'd held inside found their echo in her voice. I wanted to reach for her, to speak the half-confession that had hovered on my lips for weeks. Instead, I let the words settle in the space between us, heavy and warm. She stepped even closer, just a breath away, and I felt the tension of restraint crack slightly. She smiled, the kind of small, real smile that isn't performance, that doesn't need a flourish to exist. I lifted my hand slowly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. She didn't flinch, didn't move away. She just let me, and the moment settled. Not explosive, not dramatic, just real. "Okay," she said softly. I nodded, letting the word carry everything I hadn't dared to say. "I'm here. I see you. I'll wait." And in that quiet exchange, everything shifted. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was promised. But the air felt lighter, the room warmer, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a choice, together or apart, but at least conscious this time. Weeks passed. In that way weeks always do. Quiet, unnoticed until they weren't. The porch swing grew familiar again, not with tension, but with routine. I found myself leaving my shoes at the threshold, tea mug stacked just so, black coffee ready on mornings that weren't quite 6, but not quite 7 either. She was there most evenings, her hair pinned loosely, sleeves rolled up, a book half open on her lap. Sometimes we didn't speak for long stretches, just moving in tandem, sharing the small rituals that had accumulated over months. Stirring tea, folding napkins, sliding doors close a little too slowly, catching each other's eyes in passing. One rainy Thursday, we sat on the bench outside the grocery store again, umbrella side by side, hands brushing as we reached for the coffee cups. The drizzle blurred the world around us, the streetlights reflecting in puddles, but neither of us cared. I glanced at her, and she glanced at me, and for a fraction of a second, everything was exactly as it should be. "Same order?" she asked, lifting her mug. "Always," I replied. She smiled, that small, knowing smile, the one that had caught me months ago in the cafe, and refused to let go. We didn't speak for a while after that, letting the rain fill the space between words. Some evenings, her son's friends would come and go, their laughter spilling into the yard, but we didn't flinch. The interruptions were just part of life, not a threat to what we had quietly built. Our rhythms adjusted, synced subtly like the clock ticking just a little slower when we were together. I noticed her fiddling with a stray strand of hair as she tucked her book in her bag, and I remembered the kitchen, the bench, the porch, all the small moments that had been heavy with tension once. Now, they felt light, familiar, earned. The world outside kept moving. Bills, errands, fleeting obligations. But the small sanctuary we'd carved between dishes, coffee mugs, and quiet glances stayed ours. One evening, as the sun fell into the horizon, we leaned back against the porch railing. I reached over, brushing her hand lightly. She let me, and the touch lingered only as long as it needed to, soft and deliberate. "Okay," she whispered, the word carrying all the weight of everything we had learned about each other. I nodded. No more words were necessary. The pauses, the gestures, the tiny shared silences, they had said it all. As I walked inside later, coffee in hand, I glanced at the bench outside, damp but waiting. It was ours. Not a grand declaration, not fireworks or fanfare, just a simple acknowledgement that two lives, messy and imperfect, had found their quiet intersection. And for once, the air felt like it belonged to us. I didn't need to speak it aloud. She understood, as did I, that some things, the early morning coffee, the long pauses, the gentle brush of hands, were more than enough.